It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey Not the Face with your host John Nash and your producer me, Steffi Haynes, and we have a pretty beefy episode today. It is a hodgepodge episode. We have tons of topics we're going to talk about, especially TKO and site fees, TKO and economic impact reports, TKO and tax credits. We're going to look at some stuff with Turki al-Sheikh and the Saudis' involvement in boxing. We've got a little update on Mark Hunt's case. We are going to talk about the UFC using bespoke walkout music that is custom designed for some of their stars. We have a whole bunch of topics to get into. And if you're not a subscriber, you won't have access to the whole thing because we do paywall some of it. So if you want access to that bonus content, please subscribe. Now, John, how the heck have you been? Because you are still in Minnesota.
I'm in Minnesota. We have storm weather warnings here, potential tornadoes on the way. Ooh. So if we get cut out, it means I'm on my way to Oz. And so we're gonna brave through this. So it's not too bad right now. It's some dark clouds, but we are not. Generally, I'm in a safer area. I'm in the city, so right next to the city, in the suburb, the first tier suburbs. So the odds of being hit by a tornado here are very low. But you never know. It's happened before. You
know, you mentioned Oz. And I saw a thread recently, like 2 days ago, that was pondering who the real villain in The Wizard of Oz was. Who was the real villain to you?
The real villain in The Wizard of Oz? Mm-hmm. It's the Wicked Witch, I guess, because now they have the Wicked. She's the good guy. I'm sure people are going to say the Wizard. I guess Dorothy, she killed a lot of people.
Yes. See, I was thinking Dorothy too. I just wanted to see what you thought.
So, well, look at that. I solved that riddle.
Yes, indeed. And I'm so glad you gave the answer that I picked as well. So it makes me feel a lot more intelligent. I feel super smart right now. I picked something that you did.
Well, that is not confirmation that you're smart. I'll tell you that right now.
All right. So we are going to move away from confirmation of my intelligence straight into some business stuff here. What you come for, what you listen for. And the first question, TKO, they have been getting some really exorbitant site fees domestically now. We're used to seeing these big site fees outside the U.S., but now we're getting them domestically. We saw Florida paying $18 million for 4 events, and another $12 million for 2 events is happening in New Jersey. So why are site fees inside the continental U.S. becoming so high?
Well, it's I guess a simple answer, and it's monopoly. And I'll get in that second. But if you look at the site fees, I mean, we've seen big site fees from Saudi Arabia, and they're partly paying huge amounts of money because they want the premier events, and they got to steal those events from places where they would make a lot more money. So that's why their site fees are so large. But in the U.S., because the UFC basically has a lockdown on these MMA events, the top MMA events, no other promotion provides an alternative that anybody would be interested in. And they have the same now with TKO with WWE. So if you have a if you have a town and you're trying to bring events there that'll draw economic activity and tourism and stuff, well, you would like to draw certain sporting events, big name sporting events, boxing, MMA, pro wrestling, concerts, things like that. Well, the UFC has a lockdown. So instead of you going to, multiple different bidders, like boxing, you can't get these site fees out of Vegas or, the big locations. They're the ones that kind of perfected the site fee originally because they could bring in huge amounts of whales and stuff when they have events. But now TKO is doing this all over the country. And the reason is if you're a boxing promoter, you don't get site fees from New Jersey. and LA and all these other places, because there's just a lot of other potential alternatives. You can replace the show with another boxing event. You can't do that with UFC MMA for that fan base because they have all the top events. You have to deal with them, negotiating them exclusively. And then an alternative product that you could swap out would be pro wrestling potentially. But again, the TKO now runs pro wrestling. So you can't have them bid against each other, compete against each other, and get a lower rate or free basically in your city. You have to bid to get those events in your city. So, the tourist development in Orlando, they're going to put $18 million towards 4 TKO events. New Jersey, the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority approved $12 million, $7 million for their SummerSlam, and $5 million that's going to go to UFC 316. That's what we're seeing. If you look at Zach Arnold, is called that the UFC is a government contractor. And he's, I guess him and Nate make a big deal about, how right that they're getting higher and higher site fees. I disagree a little bit, because when I think government contractor, I think Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, and site fees, they're still way down on the list of their primary sources of revenue, where Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, it's like 80-90% of all the revenue. For UFC, primary is media rights, then sponsorship, and then live events, and that's split between the actual ticket sales and site fees. Site fees is probably less than half, I think, currently. So it's a small share, but it's pure profit for them. Pure profit, because all the other expenses are taken care of. They can just increase one new revenue stream. That revenue stream is nothing but profit. So that's why, again, going back, monopoly power, because there's not, you have no replacement for high level MMA. You have no replacement except for maybe AEW, but I guess it's still way, way below the WWE for the high level pro wrestling events. And you can't even compete them against each other because TKO controls both, and they're moving into boxing in the future. You can see how they can leverage that to get more and more money out of these places, trying to get more and more events in their towns.
TKO received recently more than $4 million in tax credits for this past WrestleMania. Could you explain how that works, what it means to get tax credits, and if it will become the norm to extract that from states that they visit?
Well, this is a little different. This is their film board tax credit. So what they did is it's a transferable tax credit. Essentially, it's supposed to go to filmmakers. Now, because WrestleMania and the events around it are live TV, they're able to tap into this, where other live events would never be able to get access to this fund. So the site fees are something else, but this is a whole nother stream of revenue. TKO is very good at finding every piece of any dollar they can get. So the tax credit is essentially, it's a rebate or refund that the filmmakers, I put that in air quotes, usually it's a filmmaker, gets to reduce costs to bring their production to that state. Transferable means that an out-of-state company that can't really use that rebate can sell it, is allowed to sell it to someone in state. So that's how they recoup the money. So that's how that works. And on top of that, they also got a $5 million sponsorship from the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority. So $9 million of revenue, not revenue, but a $4 million transferable tax credit, which is basically free money, because you can sell it for someone else to get the tax credit, and $5 million in sponsorship. That's $9 million in revenue. I guess you could add to the revenue because of that from the state. So that shows you how good they are. And this is an event that, the budget was, this cuts down the budget. The budget was $33.7 million, I believe. And so you have all these expenses in state, and I'm sure they show the economic impact studies they do, which are all bullshit, but these events generate tremendous. I think this is the highest grossing WrestleMania ever. So you're thinking probably multiples of what they spent, and yet they're able to get the governments of the city to give them tax breaks to cut down their costs even more, even though the vast majority of the money is going out of state.
Now, you mentioned the economic impact report. The wages that they reported paid out were $2.7 million to Nevada residents, but 17 million went to out-of-state workforce. Are those acceptable numbers?
Well, personally, I'd say no. I mean, it's what you're getting from the WrestleMania being there is you're getting 2.4 million for the Nevada workers on the event, another 260,000 they included for Nevada security workers, and then 5.3 million in expenditures in Nevada. So you're talking basically about 8 million total spent in Nevada, and for that you got a $5 million sponsorship. I guess you could say that's for future travelers for other events. They'll see it at the WrestleMania and they'll decide to come to Vegas. And you got a $4 million tax credit. So almost all your Nevada expenses were taken care of by the tax credit. And on top, those expenditures, it doesn't seem like a good exchange. But they're trying to keep Vegas as a prime location. They're trying to keep it as a destination, and they view these events as important. And when you have to deal with one company that controls all these major events, you probably going to cave in and give them a lot more than anybody else to get those events in Vegas. It is interesting to show that the difference in money spent by WrestleMania towards the certain talent, the local Nevada stagehands. And I wonder, because if they're using a lot of the talent for production that TKO, with the UFC, and the UFC is based in Nevada, I wonder how many of those people are actually, Nevada residents. They're, that they're the standard TKO production crew that they're getting the tax credit based on, is that they would have been paying them no matter what. Mm-hmm. That's one thing I wonder. But on top of that is that how much they pay, according to the filing, they paid $2.7 million to non-resident below the line labor, and another 17 million for non-resident above the line talent. Those are film terms. Above the line are the producers, the director, the screenwriters, basically everybody that gets their name before the title, the stars, and then the end crawl are the below the line people. So almost $20 million of that cost for the WrestleMania production went to outside the state. So those people are taking their money outside the state for this event, which they gave this huge tax credit for. So, I mean, again, you'd have to see what those economic impact studies are. And if you believe them, I think there's a lot of evidence that those economic impact studies are just made up. And part of the appeal is when you give government officials control of the books, you give them control of the budget to bring these events in. There's a glamour thing where they just love the idea of bringing in these big events and taking part in them. And the real truth is, just like a lot of those pro league stadiums that the states pay for, they're not as economically productive as they claim to be. They're there because they just make people feel good, and they have the glamour, and they want to have a pro sports team in their city, and they want to be able to go to these events and mingle with the celebrities and pat each other in the back that they brought this event. But again, maybe those economic studies, some of them, maybe the UFC TKO ones, WWE ones are real, and they really have a $200 million economic impact on a city when they bring WrestleMania. I'm just a little suspicious.
I just found it funny that there was only 2.7 million domestic jobs for Nevada, yet they paid 4.2 million in tax credits. I just thought that was funny. That's all. Yep. An article from CNBC Sports came out last week and discussed how the Saudi push into boxing wasn't like their approach to other sports. They put up live golf and some soccer and things like that. What were the big takeaways from this piece for you?
Well, there were some interesting bits about it. One of the most interesting, I thought, personally, about the article, I guess, would be the part about the investors, the reason they were interested in boxing because of its fractured marketplace. I think they had a quote from someone that it's dysfunctional, but it's the right kind of dysfunction, and that the media rights are alone or ripe for thoughtful consolidation. And I'm like, that these people might have been listening to Kurt Emhoff, who for years have talked about that the fractured nature of boxing, that the promoters have got to work together in some way to pool the boxing events, the media rights, because they are leaving so much money on the table. If you could somehow work together just for the media rights, kind of like what the original sports associations kind of did, the NFL, Major League Baseball, they teamed together the sports leagues to sell their rights together because they could get much bigger TV deals, and that way they can, they could collude in some ways so they wouldn't have events on the same night and rob the audience from each other, so that way they can guarantee the largest amount possible for those media rights. Kurt Emhoff has argued that for years. The promoters should think about this, and they're kind of saying that's the true value of a boxing league. Again, air quotes, says there's no such thing as a league in boxing, but the value of it is if you can do something with the boxing and rights, if you can dominate, monopolize it, turn it into a UFC model, WWE model for boxing, you can get much, much bigger TV rights. So I think that was pretty interesting that they mentioned that. They talked a little bit about that. And then the other interesting part is about how Sila, the Saudi company, part of the PIF fund owned by them, they sought out TKO, and I guess the lawyers from Latham and Watkins, which is the TKO's UFC's longtime firm. They arranged the meeting, the deal. And what I find interesting about that, it makes sense that they sought them out, because I think they pivoted from kind of just putting on big events for the glory of Saudi Arabia. And this to me is a sign that they actually view this as a sport that they can really take over and monetize, because that's why you would seek out TKO, who has the expertise in getting media rights and running, monopoly entities in the UFC and WWE and in the similar combat sports world.
What did you think about the sourcing that the author or authors used for this? Because they were pretty reliant on using quotes from from the Ring, and basically allowing Turki Al-Sheikh to wipe the record clean of his comments about how they were going to destroy all the competition and everything, allowing him to cite that as rumors when we all saw the tweets and many, many people screen capped it. What did you think of that? Do you think they were properly sourcing?
No, not at all. I mean, they sourced. They did comment earlier in the article that they acquired, I believe they acquired the media rights to Ring Magazine, but they didn't lay out. This is an arm, a wing of Turki Al-Sheikh. It's the name of his promotional company now, Ring as well. So it's obviously a biased, you can't take it as an unbiased media source. And yet they quoted as saying Turki is not looking to, disrupt or, destroy the other promoters. He wants a peaceful relationship with all of them. And like you said, we've talked about it repeatedly on here. You have shared numerous tweets and videos and comments and whatever of Turki and other people in his sphere of influence, talking about how they're going to destroy, lock away, take over, whatever, the boxing industry. So it is kind of entertaining or I should say it's not even entertaining, it's a little sad that as much as work as maybe they did in this piece, they didn't maybe look at some of the other sources that would give it a little more honest view of what he has said or plans. And one thing is you can kind of tell that he obviously, I think, wants to take over boxing, because why would you seek out TKO then? Right. Mm. And why would TKO, want to amend the Aliak? And why would Nick Khan say they want to turn it into a UFC boxing?
Yeah. The Athletic New York Times also had a special report on Turki Al-Sheikh. Can you give us a summary of the most interesting parts in that one?
Yeah, it was a really good in-depth piece. Now, most of it we've been aware of. If you follow, I guess we've talked about it on here. If Kareem Sedan has talked about it, Matt Brown over at Brunch Boxing, RNJ on Twitter, even Fred Garvin on Twitter, just a bunch of people have talked about elements of this, but it really did a good job of summarizing, consolidating all the stories around Turki Al-Sheikh. And also gave a little insight into his role in the government there. And I think did a pretty good job of giving it a direction of what he's actually after, is he runs the General Entertainment Authority, which is the body of the Saudi government, their sovereign fund. That's their job is to bring events to Saudi Arabia and turn it into a destination. And so it's it had a bunch of interesting things to detailing that about his role in that part, and it also had a number of kind of disturbing things, which again, a lot of them might not be shocking to people that have listened to every episode we've done, but if you missed a few or might have want a consolidated rundown of all he's done, they did a good job. And some of the things they talked about is he's detained and sent a number of people who sent critical tweets about him. I mean, we're talking about stuff criticizing his way he runs a Egyptian soccer team. And they apparently sent him to jail where they have a wing known as the Tutu wing because he sent so many people there. His close relationship with MBS, which was formed because they played video games together and how much that's a strong base of his power, that Al-Sheikh was a key on the ground operator to MBS's rise to power, helping them, when they took all the other members of the royal family or members of royalty, I should say, and important key figures in Saudi Arabia hostage and basically forced him to hand over power to him, that he has a reputation in Saudi high society for throwing embarrassing tantrums, that one of his entourage that was spotted is a man wanted by the FBI. He apparently he got people planted or contacted people in Twitter, got them to turn over key information about private accounts, Twitter accounts, so they could probably go after those people who are critical of their government. And last and not least, he's suspected of being responsible for an Egyptian singer disappearing for public view because she complained apparently that he had assaulted her. And so, although no charges were brought against him, which is also not surprising considering his position as authority. So there's just a long rundown of all these stuff he's done that would paint him in not a very nice light, to say it lightly. So I found that interesting because it's a good rundown, and some of the details were not fully known to us. Also, what's interesting is his feud apparently with the PIF, the investment fund of the public investment fund for Saudi Arabia. I think his name is pronounced Al Rumayyan, and Sila is also owned by the PIF. And that their feud also was directed, or they had a little bit of a dispute over Saudi Arabia's investment in DAZN. Al-Sheikh won that, and that's why they're invested in DAZN and something else. So there's a lot of interesting details in that article around Al-Sheikh and his relationship to the Crown Prince, the Saudi government, his position, in the fund, and why he gets to run boxing. So I definitely recommend it, but it's nothing new if you follow the story closely, but it does a very good job of summarizing and consolidating all the stories.
Speaking of the Saudis' involvement in boxing, Luke Thomas had a video that discussed the possible amending of the Ali Act and also brought up what some of the proposed changes might be. What do you think of these changes?
Well, first, I recommend that everybody go check out this video. It's very good. He highlights he does a good job of highlighting the potential change, the risk, I guess. But the other thing, talking about how much the ABC seems to be dropping the ball on this and abandoning their responsibilities. Although Mike Mazzulli apparently contacted him and defended themselves from these accusations, but we'll wait and see what's going on there. But he talked about from another source that one thing the TKO apparently is talking about getting their own titles and their own rankings and titles, which if I did an article last week, if you're interested, talking about the history of why the Ali Act probably covers not letting promoters operate as sanctioning organizations, and the congressional hearing and the various court rulings that led to that why that was inserted in the Ali Act. So if you want to check that out on the Substack. But he talked about that one thing they're supposedly proposing is that there would be a minimum purse for fighters on cards in exchange for them being allowed to have their own titles and control their own rankings and not have to be under the Ali Act for those. So that's a change. Now, part of it, I'm sure a lot of people look at it and say, that's great. Look at that, fighters, on the undercard of a boxing event will make more than fighters any place else. So the bottom guys be making a lot more. And that's a positive. But that seems, when you think about how boxing and MMA works, how the top guys generate all the revenue, if you can pay the bottom guys a little more, but are allowed to control the top guys and cap their income, and then basically use a portion of that money you're taking away from the top guys to pay the bottom guys, you can make out like a bandit. So I would be a little suspicious of that. I'm sure, though, it's going to be proposed as a positive pro-labor move. And I'm sure, as I joked on Twitter, that Sean O'Brien might be called in to endorse it, to the head of the Teamsters. But I would be on the lookout for that, because that's an interesting proposal by him, but also one that seems intentionally designed to mask what the true purpose of the changes are.
Staying on the boxing track, there have been a lot of rumors swirling around. This just blows my mind. We discussed this before, but it seems like it might have been a real thing, or might be a real thing. But rumors swirling around a Gervonta Davis-Jake Paul fight. What do you make of all that?
Well, I think it possibly was true. I will say the caveat here is Eddie Hearn brought this up, and he brought up as an excuse for why Shakur Stevenson left him. And the reason Shakur left him, he said, is because he can't guarantee him a fight with Gervonta Davis, because Gervonta Davis is going to be fighting Jake Paul in the fall. So, possibly true based on all the other previous rumors. And it seems very likely that there would have been a Jake Paul Davis fight if Davis hadn't lost. But this might be something Hearn is saying also to defend himself against why he lost, give an excuse for why he lost Shakur. But I think it's very possible. I mean, Paul is working on a deal with Netflix. He's raising a ton of money. He wants to put big fights. PBC wants to be involved in big fights. They're trying to get, expand their TV deal. Davis is running towards the end of his career. He has a few fights left. Now is before you take the very risky Shakur fights or anybody else that are very risky fights. I guess Lomachenko might be back on the table. But before you start taking them, you kind of want to cash out on the fight that's the freak fight, because one is he could possibly beat Paul, but two is I have suspicions that he would have trouble with Paul just because of the size difference. I mean, Davis is in a whole nother world of talent, but the size, there's a reason there's weight classes. But losing to Paul or having a draw or something would not damage him that much, considering the size difference. So you'd want to do that now, cash out. So I do think this is a very strong. There's probably a lot of truth to this. I have not, because I'm in Minnesota, I have not had a chance to ask around. If I find any information confirming it, I'll let you know. But it seems very likely that this is a possible bout. Before
the Prochas-Gary fight, because we are going to move into some UFC content to wrap up the show, UFC and PFL. But before the Prochas-Gary fight, an interview with their head coach caught him talking about how entertainment is what the UFC values most, and that was what they were trying to bring. Have the days of meritocratic advancement for fighters come to an end? I mean, I honestly don't think there ever was a day for that fully. First, I should note, this comes from a Chuck Mindenhall article. Mm-hmm. So good old Chuck. I have not been reading enough quality, longer form MMA. So it's happy to, I recommend everybody go out and read that, because it's very much worth reading. And Chuck is a great writer. And it's an entertaining read. And as we said before, the fight nerds are probably the most entertaining thing going, in UFC right now. It feels like to me, I know a lot of guys are, who's that pro wrestling team that wears glasses? Everybody keeps bringing up, the Dudley brothers or something. I think so.
Yeah, that's way, I stopped watching, but they remind me of bizarrely like the Varsity Club, just these weird guys acting weird in pro wrestling. That's a real old 80s reference to a pro wrestling team, but they remind me of something like that. And they're fun. But the meritocracy part about the entertainment, I think that it's a lesson everybody has learned, and they pretend not to learn. We've always known that if you are a grinder, a grappler, that does not have a big fan base. That'll take you much longer to work your way to the top. Jake Shields basically had to beat Dan Henderson and do all this stuff and to get a chance in the UFC. John Fitch had to work forever. And even remember when they won on title elimination bouts, they put him in title elimination bouts after he lost to GSP as a chance for a rematch, and he'd win them, and then they'd find an excuse to put him in a different fight. Mm-hmm. So he didn't even get the opportunity then. Chael Sonnen famously came up with the pro wrestling angle to get the attention so he could move to the top of the line. So entertainment's always been a primary mover. I guess I should say we've always had a track of some sort of meritocracy because, as I talk about in that Aliak piece, the public generally has an idea of who the best fighters are. They will not just accept you claiming anybody the best. But you can put your thumb on the scales and move people ahead if they're more entertaining, give them a faster track. And the people that are still very good, but not maybe as big a fan pleasing for the fans, or not as don't have as big a fan base, they can take a much longer time to get there. So we've always been that way. So I don't think it's the end of meritocracy. I think this is a camp of fighters that have come to realize it, and where a lot of other fighters might not publicly state it, they have come to realize it and are working very hard to get around that barrier of trying to come up with something to give them an advantage where they can move on the fast track towards titles instead of on the slow track where you don't have a fan base.
What do you think about their treatment of John Jones in regards to Tom Aspinall and them not stripping him, but they're discussing stripping Islam Makhachev if he doesn't take the Ilia Topuria fight, et cetera, et cetera? What do you make of that in regards to meritocracy? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!